shortly before 2 a.m. on May 14, 2008. A 19-year-old college student named Brandon Swanson called his parents from the side of a dark road in rural Minnesota. His car was in a ditch. He was not hurt. He asked them to come pick him up. For the next 47 minutes, Brandon stayed on the phone with his father. He described what he saw. He tried to signal with his headlights. He waited, and then he walked. And then, exactly 47 minutes into the call, he said two words that became the last thing anyone ever heard him say. "Oh shit." And then, nothing. The line did not disconnect. It went silent. His father called his name over and over, and no one answered. And the silence on the other end of the phone was absolute. Brandon Swanson has not been seen or heard from since. His car was found the next day. Doors open, keys missing. No sign of damage beyond the ditch. It had slid into. A team of bloodhounds tracked a scent trail believed to be Brandon's for roughly 3 miles across field roads, past an abandoned farmhouse, and along the Yellow Medicine River. Extensive searches have turned up nothing. No body, no cell phone, no keys, no clothing. In 18 years, not a single physical artifact of Brandon Swanson has ever been recovered. And the question that remains is not simply what happened to him. It is why he was searching for himself in the wrong town. Why he was 25 miles from where he believed he was, in the opposite direction. And what he saw in the dark, in the final seconds before he spoke those two words that made a 19-year-old boy vanish from the surface of the earth without leaving a trace. This is the case of Brandon Swanson. And this is the open file. Brandon Victor Swanson was born on January 30th, 1989, in Marshall, Minnesota, a city of roughly 14,000 people in the southwestern corner of the state, surrounded by farmland that stretches to the horizon in every direction. He was the son of Brian and Annette Swanson. He had a sister named Jamin. He graduated from Marshall Senior High School in 2007. After high school, Brandon enrolled at the Minnesota West Community and Technical College campus in Canby, roughly 30 miles northwest of Marshall. He chose to study wind turbines, a field that suited a person who liked knowing how things worked, who was drawn to the practical and the mechanical. He was 5'6", 120 pounds, small enough that his friends teased him about it, and quick enough that he teased them back. He drove a Chevrolet Lumina. He had a cell phone. He was 19 years old, and the spring semester was ending. And on the evening of May 13th, 2008, he stayed in Canby to celebrate with friends. He attended 2 parties that night. He drank, but friends later said he did not appear heavily intoxicated, not stumbling, not slurring, not the kind of drunk that makes a person get lost on roads they have driven 100 times. He was in a good mood. The school year was over. He had plans for the summer. He was a young man at the beginning of everything, on a night that should have been unremarkable. Before midnight, he got into his Chevrolet Lumina and began the 30-mile drive home. He never arrived. The call came just before 2 a.m. Brandon's parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, were at home in Marshall. Their son's voice was calm but concerned. He told them he had driven his car off the road and into a ditch. He was not injured. He could not get the car free. He needed them to come pick him up. Brian asked the question that any parent would ask, "Where are you?" Brandon said he believed he was near Lind, a small town roughly 7 miles southwest of Marshall. He said he could see lights in the distance that he thought were the lights of Lind. He was not certain. but he was confident enough to guide his parents toward him. Brian and Annette got into their pickup truck and began driving. They kept Brandon on the phone. The three of them tried to coordinate, the parents driving toward what they believed was their son's location, the son standing beside his car in the dark, waiting. Brandon flashed his headlights. His parents flashed theirs. Neither could see the other. They said, "We're flashing our lights. Do you see us?" He said, "No. Do you see mine?" They did not. The lights they were signaling with, the headlights of a pickup truck and the headlights of a Chevrolet Lumina, were invisible to each other in the dark, separated by a distance that no one could measure because no one knew where Brandon actually was. After some time, Brandon made a decision. He told his parents he was going to leave the car and walk toward the lights he could see. He believed Lind was within walking distance. He believed he could reach it. He told his father to drive to the parking lot of a local bar in Lind, a landmark they both knew, and wait for him there. Brandon Swanson began driving toward that bar. His son was on the phone, walking through the dark, and the distance between them was supposed to be closing. It was not closing, because Brandon Swanson was not near Lind. He was approximately 25 miles away in a completely different area than he believed, and neither he nor his parents knew it yet. Brandon walked. He stayed on the phone with his father, describing what he saw. He mentioned passing fences. He mentioned hearing water nearby, the sound of a stream or a river, close enough to hear in the dark, but not close enough to see. He did not sound panicked. He did not sound drunk. His father would later say that Brandon seemed lucid, alert, oriented to his surroundings, even if those surroundings were not what he believed them to be. The call lasted 47 minutes. For most of that time, Brandon was walking, away from his car, toward lights he believed were Lind, through terrain he could not see, in a part of Minnesota he had not intended to be in. Investigators later concluded that somewhere during that walk, he likely crossed from Lyon County into Lincoln County. Somewhere during that walk, he passed an abandoned farmhouse, a structure that would become significant later when the dogs followed his scent and stopped there. Somewhere during that walk, the terrain began to slope toward the Yellow Medicine River, a tributary that winds through the farmland of southwestern Minnesota, shallow in some places and deep in others, its banks cut with erosion and hidden by brush. Brandon did not know the river was there. He did not know the farmhouse was there. He was navigating by a light he could see and a town he believed was close, and every step he took was a step further into a landscape that was not on any map he had ever looked at. His father drove toward the bar in Lind. The phone stayed connected. The minutes kept passing. The distance between them, the real distance, not the distance Brandon believed existed, never closed. At approximately 2:30 a.m., 47 minutes into the call, Brandon Swanson interrupted himself. "Oh shit," that was all. 2 words, spoken suddenly, with an urgency that his father could hear and would never forget. And then, silence. The call did not disconnect. This is a detail that is often misreported. The line did not go dead. It did not drop. It went silent. The call remained connected, but Brandon was no longer speaking. Brandon Swanson would later say he heard a slipping sound through the phone, a sound he interpreted as his son slipping or falling. It was not loud enough to be certain about, not distinct enough to identify, but it was there, and it was the last sound that came through the line before the silence settled in and did not lift. Brian called his son's name. Again and again and again. No answer, no sound, no movement. The silence on the other end of the phone was so complete that it was, in its own way, worse than a dial tone. A dial tone means the call is over. Silence means the person on the other end is still there, or was there, and is not responding. After some time, Brian and Annette hung up. They tried calling back. The phone rang. No one answered. They tried again. It rang. No one answered. They tried again and again and again. The phone kept ringing. Brandon never picked up. At 6:30 a.m., they reported their son missing to the Lynn police. The response they received was not the response they expected. The Lynn police told Brian and Annette Swanson that their son had a right to be missing. He was 19. He was an adult. Young men his age, after the last day of college classes, often stayed out all night. It was not unusual. It was not a crime. There was nothing the police could do. Not yet. Not until more time had passed. Annette Swanson would later recall that moment with a clarity that no amount of time has dulled. "I'm his mother," she said, "and I knew something was horribly wrong." But the police did not know what she knew. They had not heard the 2 words her son said before he went silent. They had not heard the slipping sound. They had not spent 47 minutes on the phone with a boy who was walking through the dark, trying to find his way home, and then, suddenly, completely, was gone. Later that morning, the Lynn police did begin a search. They found no trace of Brandon in the town or outside it. They requested assistance from the Lyon County Sheriff's Office. To narrow the search area, the Sheriff's Office obtained Brandon's cell phone records. What those records revealed changed everything. Brandon's call had been routed through a cell tower near Minneota, Minnesota, northwest of Marshall, along State Highway 68. The call had originated within a 5-mile radius of that tower. That radius included the small towns of Taunton and Porter. Porter is 25 miles from Lind. It is in the opposite direction from Canby. Brandon had been calling from farmland near Porter, not from the outskirts of Lind, not from the southwestern edge of Marshall, but from a place that was so far from where he believed he was that the error was not a mistake. It was a disorientation so complete that it had erased the geography of the world he knew. Deputies began searching near Taunton. They found Brandon's Chevrolet Lumina in a ditch along a gravel road on the Lincoln County line, 1 mile north of Highway 68. The car was not damaged. The doors were open. The keys were missing. There were no tracks in the grass and gravel around the car. No way to tell which direction Brandon had started walking. He had walked away from the car believing he was walking toward Lind. He had been walking northwest, into the farmland between Taunton and Porter, toward the Yellow Medicine River. And the cell tower that routed his call, the tower that had no reason to connect him to his parents if he was anywhere near Lind, told the truth that Brandon did not know. He had never been where he thought he was. The second day of the search, a team of bloodhounds arrived from Codington County, South Dakota. Bloodhounds do not follow tracks. They follow scent, skin cells, sweat, the microscopic debris that every human body sheds continuously as it moves through the world. A trained bloodhound can follow a scent trail that is hours or even days old, across pavement, across water, across fields. The dogs started at Brandon's car. They picked up a trail immediately. The trail ran half a mile south from the car, then turned west onto 390th Street, where it continued for a mile. Then it turned north onto County Road 16, where it continued for another half mile. Then it turned west again, onto the driveway of an abandoned farm. At the abandoned farm, the trail left the driveway and roughly followed the course of the Yellow Medicine River, heading northwest. At one point, one of the bloodhounds jumped into the river and then climbed out on the other side. The handler interpreted this as possibly indicating that Brandon had fallen into the river at that point, or had entered it deliberately and then climbed out. But the trail did not end at the river. It continued past that point, toward a drainage area, and then north toward the gravel road that forms the boundary between Lincoln and Yellow Medicine counties. And there, at the edge of a gravel road 3 miles from where it had started, the trail stopped. The dog could go no further. The scent trail could not be continued beyond that point. 3 miles. Brandon had walked 3 miles through farmland in the dark, past an abandoned farmhouse, along a river he could hear but probably could not see. And then he had said, "Oh shit," and the call had gone silent, and the dogs that followed his scent could not follow it past a gravel road at the edge of a county line. The dogs did not find a body. They did not find a phone. They did not find keys or clothing, or any physical evidence that Brandon Swanson had ever been there. They found only the trail of his scent, the ghost of a walk that ended at a road, as though he had simply ceased to exist at the boundary between 2 counties and left nothing behind. The most obvious theory, the one that investigators returned to again and again, was that Brandon Swanson fell into the Yellow Medicine River and drowned. The river was running high on the night of May 14. In some places along the Lincoln County stretch, the water was 10 feet deep. The banks were steep and unstable. If Brandon had been walking in the dark near the river and had slipped, if the slipping sound his father heard through the phone was his son going into the water, then the silence that followed could be explained by a phone submerged or a body swept downstream. The Minnesota Department of Natural Resources deployed boats along the river. Gates were installed to catch debris. Divers searched the deeper sections. Deputies walked the banks. Horses and all-terrain vehicles were deployed in the surrounding area. Sheriff Jack Vizecki of Lincoln County walked 2 miles of the Yellow Medicine every day for 30 days, searching the banks and the shallows for any sign of a body. Nothing was found. In the fall of 2021, 13 years after Brandon's disappearance, drought conditions caused the Yellow Medicine River to dry up in sections. Search teams took advantage of the low water to excavate and drag sections of the riverbed that had been inaccessible before. They found nothing. No remains, no clothing, no phone, no keys. The river theory has never been disproven, but it has also never been proven, and Annette Swanson does not believe her son is in the river. She points to the bloodhound that entered the water and climbed out the other side. She points to the trail that continued past the river, north toward the county line. There really is nothing to indicate that he's in the river, she told CNN. Nothing. The search for Brandon Swanson continued for years. In the late fall of 2008, after the fields that had been planted shortly after Brandon disappeared were harvested, searches resumed. Dogs on those searches continued to follow scents of human remains into an area northwest of Porter that had not been previously searched. The scent was there, faint but present, and led investigators to believe that Brandon's body, or evidence of it, might be somewhere in that quadrant of farmland. The cycle repeated in the spring, after the snow melted, but before new crops were planted, year after year. By 2011, 122 square miles had been searched. a grid that covered fields, drainage ditches, riverbanks, woodlots, abandoned structures, and every piece of terrain between Taunton, Porter, and the Yellow Medicine River. In 2010, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension took over as the lead investigative agency. A tip line was established. By 2015, 90 leads had been reported. None of them produced a breakthrough. To date, no physical evidence related to Brandon Swanson has been recovered. Not his cell phone, not his car keys, not a single article of clothing, not a single bone. In 18 years, the search has produced nothing. Not because the search has failed, but because whatever happened to Brandon Swanson in the dark on May 14th, 2008, happened in a way that left no trace, or left a trace so small that 122 square miles of searching could not find it. What happened to Brandon Swanson after he said, "Oh shit"? The river theory is the most widely accepted. He was near water. He mentioned hearing it. The bloodhound entered the river. The slipping sound his father heard is consistent with a fall from a steep bank. A person can drown in a surprisingly small amount of water, especially in the dark, especially if they are disoriented, especially if the water is cold and the shock of immersion steals their breath before they can cry out. But if he drowned, why was his body never found? The Yellow Medicine River is not a deep or fast-moving river under normal conditions. Bodies that enter rivers are usually recovered downstream, snagged on debris, caught in bends, surfaced by changes in water level. Divers searched. Gates were installed. The river was walked for 30 days. Nothing. The foul play theory cannot be ruled out. Sheriff Vizecki said as much. Brandon was walking alone on a rural road at 2:30 in the morning. A vehicle could have approached. He could have flagged it down. Someone could have been in the shadows. A stranger, an opportunity, a crime of chance committed against a 19-year-old who was lost and alone and desperate to get home. But there is no evidence of foul play. No sign of a struggle near the car. No suspicious activity reported in the area that night. No person of interest identified in 18 years. There is a third theory, one that is harder to articulate, but that surfaces in discussions of this case again and again. It is the theory of the landscape itself. The farmland of southwestern Minnesota is not empty. It is full of hazards that are invisible in the dark. Drainage culverts, abandoned wells, sinkholes, grain silos, farm machinery left in fields. A person walking across a planted field in the dark can step into a hole they never saw. A person crossing a drainage ditch can slip and hit their head and never get up. A person passing through a field that is later harvested by farm equipment could potentially suffer catastrophic injuries, complicating later recovery efforts. This theory is grim. It is also possible, and it shares with all the other theories the same central feature: no body, no evidence, no closure. Only the silence that began 47 minutes into a phone call and has never ended. On the morning of May 14th, 2008, when Brian and Annette Swanson reported their son missing, the Lind police told them that a 19-year-old had the right to be missing. That phrase, the right to be missing, stayed with Annette Swanson. It would not leave her. She understood, intellectually, that the police were following protocol. Missing adult cases were not treated with the same urgency as missing child cases. Adults had autonomy. Adults could choose to disappear, but her son was not choosing to disappear. Her son was lost in the dark, walking toward lights he could not reach, and the hours that passed while the police waited to act were hours that could never be recovered. Annette met with Marty Seifert, the minority leader of the Minnesota House of Representatives, whose district included Marshall. They sat down in a local restaurant. She told him what had happened. She told him about the phone call. She told him about the words, "Oh shit," and the silence that followed and was never broken. She told him about the officer who said her son had the right to be missing. She knew it wouldn't help in her son's case, Seifert later recalled, but that it could help others in the future. Seifert introduced a bill called Brandon's Law. It amended Minnesota's existing missing child program by changing the word child to person, a single word that required law enforcement to begin investigating missing adult cases immediately, without delay, the same way they would investigate a missing child. There was resistance from the law enforcement community. Concerns about privacy, about cell phone tracking, about the resources that would be required. The bill worked its way through committee. It passed. On July 1st, 2009, Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty signed Brandon's Law into effect. A 19-year-old boy from Marshall, Minnesota, a boy whose body has never been found, whose phone has never been recovered, whose parents still keep a porch light burning for him in the dark, changed the law of an entire state, not because he was found, because he wasn't, and because his mother refused to let the words, "the right to be missing," stand as the final answer to a family's desperation. Brandon's Law has since influenced similar legislation in other states. It has changed how missing adult cases are handled across the country. It is the only thing that came back from the 47 minutes. For at least 5 years after Brandon disappeared, Brian and Annette Swanson left their porch light on every night. It was not a symbolic gesture. It was a beacon. In case their son found his way home and needed to see the house, it was the same instinct that had driven them to flash their headlights on a dark road while Brandon flashed his, trying to find each other in the dark. The light was a signal. The light said, "We are still here. We are still looking. We have not stopped." Annette Swanson still checks her phone. The tip line is still active. The reward is still posted. Every few years, a new search is organized, a new area, a new theory, a new group of volunteers walking in grid formation across the farmland between Taunton and Porter. And Brandon is still gone. The mystery of this case is not simply the disappearance, it is the disorientation that preceded it. The fact that a 19-year-old boy drove 30 miles in the wrong direction and did not realize it, that he believed he was in one town and was actually in another, that he walked 3 miles towards lights he thought were Lind, while every step took him further from where his parents were searching. His father recalls that Brandon did not seem confused or disoriented on the phone. He seemed like himself, lucid, calm, making decisions. But somewhere in his mind, the map had been turned. The geography of the place he had lived his entire life had been rearranged without his knowledge, and he walked into a landscape that he did not recognize, believing it was a landscape he had known since childhood. What he saw in the final seconds, what made him say, "Oh shit," is unknown. It may have been the river, it may have been a vehicle, it may have been a hole in the ground that he did not see until he was falling into it. It may have been nothing more than the sudden, terrifying realization that the lights he had been walking toward were not the lights of Lind, were not the lights of any town he knew, were not lights at all, but something else. Something that looked like safety from a distance and was not. Whatever it was, it took him. And 18 years later, it has not given him back. And somewhere in the farmland of southwestern Minnesota, whether in the river, in a field, in a drainage ditch, in an abandoned well, or somewhere investigators have never considered, the answer to what happened to Brandon Swanson remains hidden in the dark, where 18 years of searching have not been able to reach him. The call did not disconnect. It went silent. And sometimes, in cases like this, that silence is all that remains.